Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this book presentation. So during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat to write questions and comments, and we will review them at the end of the presentation during our question time. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Daniela Bini. Daniela Bini is Professor of Italian Comparative Literature at the University of Texas at Austin. Her books include The Fragrance from the Desert, Poetry and Philosophy in Giacomo Leopardi, Carlo Michelstaedter and the Failure of Language, Pirandello and His Muse, The Place of Marta Abba, and Portrait of the Artist and His Mother in 20th century Italian literature. She's also the author of more than 70 essays on artists as different as Ippolito Nievo, Giacomo Leopardi, Giovanni Verga, Italo Svevo, Pietro Mascagni, Giuseppe Verdi, Luigi Pirandello, Leonardo Sciascia, Giuseppe Tornatore and the Taviani brothers, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Zeffirelli, Bellocchio. She's also the co-author of 2 Italian textbooks and of Giacomo Leopardi's Zibaldone. Daniela received several university fellowships, 2 national endowment for the Humanities Fellowships, and 3 teaching awards. She was the president of the American Association for Italian Studies and the vice-president of the International Association of Italian Language and Literature Studies. In 2007, the president of the Italian Republic, Giorgio Napolitano, bestowed on her the title of Cavaliere, Ordine della Stella della Solidarietà Italiana. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bini.
Oh, I want to thank everybody too, because I'm very, moved by this presentation. But first of all, I want to thank my chair, Professor Paola Bonifacio, for this initiative. This is the first time in the history of this department, at least in the 50 years, more or less, I've been around, there is such initiative as happened. And of course, it is also the first year in 50 years, more or less, that we have this incredible rich production of scholarly books. I have therefore to congratulate, and I want to congratulate my colleagues. They have really become, splendid authors. So my book, okay. As I say in my introduction and also in my acknowledgements, I had 2 purposes for writing it. One was autobiographical, and I have to say was really the driving force. I was born and spent my adolescent years in Italy, surrounded by a number of mammoni, mama's boys. And as an Italian adolescent, who grew up in Italy in a society and a family, male-oriented, centered, based. Of course, I had the chance to witness many of those mother-son relationships in many families of friends and relatives. But in order, of course, to be somewhat objective, for as much as one can be objective, in analyzing this phenomenon, I require some distance. And it was, in fact, a blessing for me coming to this country and finding not only the American Academy, but also an American husband who helped me not to make all the mistakes. I'm sure I made a good number of them, but still not all the mistake I would have made had I remained in Italy, and even more had I conceived children with an Italian male. And in fact, I have 2 boys, 2 sons and 1 daughter. So, but the other purpose to write in the book was a little more scholarly, although personal too, because it was still this desire of exploring the biographical relationship, mother-son, but in major authors. Some authors that I had actually worked on even throughout my career. So the counterpart of this relationship, mother-son, is the relationship boy-male erotic woman. And what I actually, this is a topos that's very well known. I mean, this dichotomy of mother, saintly mother on the one hand, and erotic woman on the other. But I wanted, and I could, in my examination, really realize that the more the son worships his mother, the more he fears the erotic woman. And this is what I wanted to explore in my book. In the introduction, I also discuss a a little bit the anthropological and sociological components of the phenomenon, although I'm not an anthropologist or a sociologist, and also in particular the strong influence of the Catholic Church in shaping this mentality. I also believe that mammismo is very closely connected with familismo and clientelismo, unfortunately, two Italian phenomena. My choice of examples follow several criteria. Biography, of course, was certainly fundamental. I've chosen artists who had an intense relationship with their mother, or at least a complex relationship with them. And my aim, however, was also to show that this phenomenon that might be considered connected and isolated to the South, at least by many Northerners, is actually spread out throughout the country. As you will see by the, with the examples I chose, they actually are, more are from the North than the South. Another criteria was that I wanted to examine not only this phenomenon in literature, but in different genres of literature, poetry, narrative, theater, but also in different media, artistic media, paintings, graphic arts, and film. So these authors are all very well known. So another thing that I did, therefore, to introduce something new was to examine works that have been not as much studied as much. For example, in the first chapter, the one of Luigi Pirandello, I concentrate on his short stories. Why? Because they have really not very much, they've not been much studied in this country, especially. If you think a lot of them have not even been translated. And Pirandello wrote something like 244 short stories. But there is another reason why I also wanted to concentrate my analysis on the short stories, is because I really consider the short story Pirandello's masterpiece. Why? Because Pirandello did not believe in language. Believe it might be paradoxical, but words are deceiving, and that was his battle constantly. He hated rhetoric. In fact, he couldn't stand Gabriele D'Annunzio. But, he, in a way, the short story, and in Pirandello, the short story is really short. I'm talking about 6-7 pages average. What is a short story? It's a brilliant idea, quickly developed and concluded before it falls into rhetorical or repetitive narrative. So I think it really fits best with Pirandello's philosophy, what he wanted to do. And of course, as you can read from the title of my chapter, Maternity and Sexuality, Pirandello's constant obsessions, that was, he is typical, is perfect for my analysis, because he had a worship for his mother. She was a saint to him and for him, but that was accompanied with fear of sexuality, especially female sexuality. So this is what I did with Pirandello. And then chapter 2 is on Paolo Pasolini. Everybody knows that Pasolini had a very intense relationship with Susanna, with his mother. He lived with her until he was murdered. And I examine, in his case, I chose poetry, because I think that this is really what he thought is the means that expresses truth and authenticity better than any others, and occupies really a sacred place for Pasolini. It is, I argue, the maternal language that allows the most intimate connection. And through poetry, this mother-son union really takes place. And in my view, Pasolini's voice speaks most sincerely through poetry. I think most sincerely through poetry than to cinema, for example, or narrative. The third chapter is on Carlo Levi. Now, with Carlo Levi, we broaden the conception of mother. First of all, I have to say that this is an author, he is a great author, great artist, but a very antipatico. He's the most narcissistic of all the authors that I studied in my career. Very self-centered, a big ego. He grew up with women. He was very attached to his mother, but he had lots of women around while he was, growing up, even his sister who adored him. And he never married. He had, some lovers. He managed to find always married women to have relationship with. And of course, everybody knows his major work, which is Cristo si è fermato ad Eboli, I think the only major narrative work. But I examine, in his case, his drawings and paintings. And as I said, with him, the concept of mother is broadened, because the mother that counted for him, that was important to him, was really the great mother. The maternal figure that becomes central is this, the great mother of beginning of history, the prime creator, pre-Christian divinity. And she coincides with what Carlo Levi called the indistinto originario, which is from which, according to him, individuals detach themselves, distinguish themselves through a process of civilization, but to which they always feel drawn back. And what I did with Levi, though, who was a much better, I think, painter than the writer, at least narrator, I examined not only, or not as much, the paintings that he did when he was confined in Lucania because of his anti-fascist ideas, but the paintings, they are really expression of this discourse that I want to bring up, namely this examination of the indistinto originario as connected to the female figure. I think you can see in this Carrubo Crocefissa, besides, he made a lot of paintings that he called Carrubo Donna. This one that I picked for you, I think you can very well detect the image in this tree of the body of a woman, which is in a crucified position with her body pierced in several parts. And in the lower part, you have this opening that seems almost to be expelling out life. They are quite, I think, disturbing, In the right one, you have Donne Furenti, as he called it, and you have these female naked bodies. They are completely connected with the indistinto originario, with this background. It's the same material. They seem to be one with them. So I spent quite a bit of time examining this aspect of his work, but also, if we talk about castrating mothers, look at this. This is, he called it la mamma cannibale. So not only castrating, she is actually eating the baby up. And then what Levi also did, and I examined some in my chapter, he made a good number of portraits of his mothers. They also are quite disturbing, all of them. Okay, so my fourth chapter is on Dino Buzzati. Dino Buzzati I chose for two reasons. One, because he's not very well known here. And second, because he exemplifies perfectly this dichotomy. He worshipped his mother. He lived with his mother until she died, aged 90. He was 54 or 55 when she died. And he married only after 5 years that she had died, with a woman, I would say girl, 40 years younger, from a much lower social class, of course. And he really had a fear of the erotic woman. He had many, not many, but a good number of relationships with prostitutes. And in fact, one of his famous novels is called Un Amore, which is very autobiographical. And then the other novel he's very famous for is Il Deserto dei Tartari, and I think it's very popular also because it's one of the very few examples of magic realism in Italian literature. I do work in my chapter, I examine some of his narrative, as you can see, but I concentrate particularly on his drawings. And this poem, Fumetti, I get to it in a minute. But then I wanted to show you a couple of the, this is sort of humorous up to a certain point. Drawings, this is the caliph in the shape of a mushroom, surrounded by his wives. They have the shape of different vegetables or fruits. And of course, he's going to eat them up according to his whims whenever he feels like, for, asparagus or a pear or an apple. But the book I concentrate on is his graphic novel called Poema Fumetti, which was quite rare in Italy. It came out in 1969. And there you really see the erotic woman. They appears like a witch, and they are all threatening images. And there is a lot of masochism in this book, because he was also very fond of bondage cartoon, Americans and Italians, and he copied. This was, for example, is a bondage cartoon copy from an American one. And here, just to end, I just wanted to put another drawing of this very, weird Spider-Man assaulting and raping this woman. Okay, then I get to my last case study, the chapter 5 on Fellini. And here I have to make a confession. In my first draft, there was no chapter on Fellini. I had no intention ever to write on this mostro sacro. Okay, Fellini is like Dante. Okay, and our guy friend and colleague here know what it is to write about Dante. Everybody in this country writes about Dante and Fellini, and they write very well. The best scholarly works on Fellini are written by Americans. There are thousands of articles, hundreds of books. So I would never dare to touch this, director. But the reader, one of the readers of my first draft, advised me to do that. I think it was a woman. Actually, she was the most, I would say, constructive in her advice and suggestions for revision. So I'm very grateful to this person. But I was just shocked when she said, this book would become much better, would gain a lot if a chapter on Fellini were included. You can imagine how I felt. I said, what am I going to do now? So my first reaction was, I take a semester off. And I did take a semester off and plunge into this. In this ocean of, criticism and production, which is really overwhelming. But what I wanted to do in order to, not compromise myself too much was I didn't touch that much on cinema. I concentrated again on his drawings. And in fact, I think the reader, they advised me to do this, did it because in the chapter on Buzzati, I do speak quite a bit of Fellini because they were friends. They were both good draftsmen. They would exchange and like each other's drawings. They even had a project together, which didn't come to fruition. So that was my cross, which I bear. And in a way, I was lucky that in 2020, I had already sent a book with this chapter. It was the 100th anniversary of Fellini's birth. So you can imagine lots of conferences, of course, took place, were organized. And I participated in 2. And that is what gave me some kind of calm, because finally I could try out my chapter with the real experts. So I received very positive comments. They encouraged me. And so I felt a little better of, sending out and having this book published. I hope that they will keep and maintain their same generosity if they read the printed version. But anyway, as I said, I concentrate more on his drawings. And as far as his concept of course, since I have to go back to my theme, which is the mother figure, with Fellini, I sort of, in the first part of the chapter, I trace his move from Rimini to Rome, the absence of his mother, but for Fellini, Rome became his real mother in a way. And then his marriage to Giulietta Masina, because I really consider Giulietta Masina the substitute mother. Giulietta is the opposite of the erotic woman, of the woman of Fellini's desire. And this is also, I think, it tells already, that we are in the right in the right territory. Giulietta, besides being, protective, caring, she was self-sacrificing. She was a great actress. But could you mention one film that she made without being directed by her husband? I can't, although I know that she did make some, but she actually worked for him and it was just in his function. And on the other hand, you have Anita Ekberg here, who was actually really the desire object of Fellini's dreams. And there are some very cute anecdotes about it, the encounter and how he felt towards this woman. But I wanted to show you how, though, even dealing with Anita, you can see some of his phobias and some of his, uncomfortable feelings, I think, even when he made this caricature. I don't know if you want to call them caricature. They are grotesque images. Of course, he tended always to enlarge and make, this incredibly enormous bodies, but the expressions in their faces, for example, they are certainly not attractive. And I don't even consider them funny. Maybe some men do consider them funny or humorous. I don't. And you can have here, on the one hand, you have, of course, the beautiful Anita Ekberg, not so beautiful, in a very famous scene of La Dolce Vita. And on the other hand, you have, a scene of Le Tentazioni del Dottor Antonio, an episode of Boccaccio 70, and the poor Peppino De Filippo squeezed between the big boobs of Anita. But what Fellini did every time he was thinking of a new film, he would start drawing because he was a great draftsman. And for La Città delle Donne, for example, for this movie, he made hundreds of drafts and drawings. And here you have one, so you can see what his fixation was. And I actually want to end with this, which I like very much. This is Donatella, one of the guides in the Città delle Donne. They actually leads Snaporats, the protagonist, around. And she is here, as you can see, holding her bullets, because they look like bullets, those tits, and ready to, shoot out like a machine, using them like a machine gun. And look at that face. I mean, how would you describe it? Ugly, yes, but also quite, threatening, cruel, certainly. Okay, so I think what I actually was concentrating more on, and I think that's the most important part of my chapter, is his Il Libro dei Sogni. Fellini wrote this, it's right, maybe the word writing is not the right one, because he made this book following the advice of Ernst Bernhard. Ernst Bernhard was a very famous German Jungian psychoanalyst, and Fellini admired him tremendously. He never admitted to be in his care. He only would tell people they had very interesting conversation with him. He would go out and have pizza with him, but no, he was not in his care. Whereas our very good biographer, I mean, the Fellini's biographer, Tullio Kedzic, says otherwise. He said, no. Fellini had regularly weekly visits with Bernhard. They were paid. And in fact, we know that Fellini was in the care of a psychoanalyst before Bernhard and after Bernhard died with his wife. Bernard advised him to write down all his dreams. Being a Jungian, psychoanalyst, believed in the importance of dreams. So write down your dream, and being the good draftsman that Fellini was, what he did was also accompany almost all of them, most of them, with drawings. And here you have one example. Il sogno di un prigioniero in un castello, abitato da espertissime, cinese poi, abitato da espertissime prostitute. You can see his fixation. There he is in the middle, surrounded by these, prostitutes. They won't gobble him up. We don't know. I mean, this is the last chapter was on I Vitelloni. And this is actually the films. Although the Vitelloni being considered a cultural construction of the economic boom of the 50s, they can also be seen as a product of this obsessive relationship, between mothers and sons. And as Fellini himself repeated, the Italian males, of course himself included, are and remain children even as adults. And so in this chapter, I survey briefly, a series of films, starting with the masterpiece of Fellini by the name I Vitelloni, for about 50 years, 6 case studies of comedy Italian style films on I Vitelloni. This at least I would like to tell you. Buzzati, I said, is probably one of the best examples of this, that represents this dichotomy, mother, saintly mother, and erotic woman on the other side. And I want to read you just this quote from him. Not because she was my mother, but I do believe she was one of the very few creatures born without original sin. So she, and of course, Mary, the mother of Christ. Okay, I think what better, identification you can have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bini, for your compelling presentations. So now we have the last 10 minutes. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask. You can use both the chat, or you can just raise your hand or just talk.
I want to say to Daniela, thank you so much for beginning with your preface, kind of your autobiography, and also the connection then with her biographical comments about knowing the work over time, the trajectory of a researcher, I think adds a really human element to the concept of research. And it's kind of a thread that's been through all of these book presentations. And I just want to mention this to the graduate students watching, that researchers are humans. And this comes out so beautifully in this talk today, that we have these ideas don't just kind of drop from the sky. They develop from who we are. And it's just a comment. And I think that's, it's important to understand that. So thank you for kind of just foregrounding those issues of research is a part of who we are.
Yes, thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Daniela, what do you think about nowadays? Do you think that, mammoni are still a reality, a big reality in Italy? Are things changing? How?
Yeah, no, Cinzia, I hope things are slowly changing, absolutely. But, I still see in some families, for example, even when I went, and Antonella, who is here, or maybe she is not because she has to teach, but can, confirm it, that I know that I have students have gone to Rome with the Rome program. And I remember when I was there 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they would be scandalized by living in a family where the boy would sit down and be served by the sister. Okay, they wouldn't get up, the brothers, to wash dishes, for example. So I still think it's a long way, to go. But of course, we hope that the new generations, but the women have to, make them change in a way. The mothers have to do some part of the work.
I agree with you in this. I think that still some of the responsibility for this phenomenon is the women's, because they allow for it.
We of course hope that now with women who have careers outside the house, they don't see that their own identity is the maternal one, and once the son is gone, they've lost their own identity because they have something else outside that gives
or maybe they lived their identity was realized through their children.
Exactly.
Rather,
so they want to keep them children, otherwise the identity would
is aware.
cease. Sure.
Grazie.
Figurati.
Daniela, my question is connected to Cynthia's one. What about geographical differences? What about, in your opinion, what's going on in southern Italy and in northern Italy, and the tradition as well? And the consequent, the legacy of the past in some way.
But again, I said at the beginning, I'm not a sociologist and anthropologist, so it's not that I'm going, go through and make studies about it. But certainly what I wanted to show that it's not related only to the South, and that's why you got Pasolini from Bologna, you have Carlo Levi from Torino, you have Dino Buzzati from Veneto, Belluno, even Fellini, who is from Rimini. So it's north. We have only Pirandello, who is a southerner that comes from Sicily. But on the other hand, an historian like Paul Ginsberg, who wrote, very important books about Italian, he doesn't concentrate only on the South. And he actually still now writes books where he says that the influence of the mother has been deleterious. And he sees that still now the phenomenon is, present. So I don't do that type of study, but of course, in my introduction, I had to talk about those aspects as well. And I used, some important texts by anthropologists and sociologists. And I think there are a few women today that they are saying, no, this is something probably there's been an invention. There is this Marina D'Amelia that says that this, relationship is more an invented tradition of the post-war period. Because she says that, this is a way that the male actually writers try to find the causes of our problems in women. And that's why, so, but I think even now you have, anthropologists and sociologists that would agree with this. And so, of course, there is hope, and I hope that things will change eventually, but yeah.
I would like to ask a personal question to Daniela, and I wanted to ask you, what was your favorite chapter to write, and what was the most difficult chapter to write for you, and why?
As I said, the most difficult was Fellini, clearly. I was, as I said, I was terrified, and if it hadn't been for those conferences I went to, I would still be totally terrified. It's not that I'm still worried, of course, because I'm sure that there are going to be Fellini scholars that will not like what I say, but still, I feel a little better now. So that was certainly the hardest. The easiest clearly was Pirandello, just because I lived with Pirandello for 30 years of my life. Most of, the majority of the article, if there is one author I wrote a lot about, is Pirandello, articles in a book. Certainly, I was very excited, of course. Carlo Levi mi è stato sempre antipatico, okay? So it was a revenge. I mean, I have to say, I was animated. In fact, this is a book I could never have written early on in my career. It's just, I wanted to exercise my demon as an Italian mother. I wanted to also, get at those male authors that I liked, that I wrote about, but I just wanted to let them have it and just get some things out of them that was not so exciting and so, praiseworthy constantly. And then of course, Buzzati was the one I really didn't know much. So I spent a lot of time on Buzzati too, but I got very mad at him, but I was extremely, excited, because I thought, this is the perfect example of what I am trying to prove. So, and he's from Belluno, up there. Decivilized, haha, Veneto.
Thank you very much again, Daniela, for your compelling presentation. They were really, really interesting. And thank you everybody for attending the presentation. It was nice to see you all.
Thank you for being here and for listening. Bye a tutti.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Arrivederci. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Grazie mille.
Ciao.
Grazie.
Ciao.
Grazie,
Ciao a
Ben.
tutti.